6 dangerous people you must never help. Jung warned us about them. If you've spent your whole life helping the wrong people, this video will feel like a revelation and a warning. Jung believed that some individuals don't just drain your energy, they infect your entire psyche. Today, you're going to learn exactly who they are and why helping them is the biggest psychological mistake you'll ever make. Part 1. The shadow-dominated individuals. People dominated by their shadow are the first and most dangerous group you must never try to help, because their inner world is not ready to receive support in a constructive way. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents the rejected, repressed, unclaimed parts of one's personality, the impulses, traits, emotions, and motivations that a person does not want to acknowledge. When an individual is controlled by the shadow, they operate from denial, projection, and emotional blindness. Any help you give them does not bring clarity but actually strengthens their inner dysfunction. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And shadow-dominated people are the perfect example of this. They are driven by unconscious wounds and refuse to recognize their own role in the chaos around them. When you try to help, you become a new target for their projections, a container for their unresolved trauma, and eventually a scapegoat for their failures. Shadow-dominated individuals live inside a psychological fog. They have developed deep habits of self-deception. They are attached to their victim narrative because it shields them from responsibility. Responsibility would mean looking in the mirror, confronting their own fear, laziness, envy, anger, or destructive tendencies. But because the shadow is uncomfortable and painful to face, they avoid introspection and instead seek people who will listen to their complaints, absorb their negativity, and give them sympathy. This is why they repeatedly return to you whenever something goes wrong but never change any behaviors after receiving your help. They see you not as a person but as an emotional sponge. The more you help, the more they drain you. The more you give, the more they expect. To them, your help is not a catalyst for improvement. It becomes a resource that keeps their dysfunction alive. Helping them becomes a trap because it encourages their passivity and helplessness. You do the emotional labor while they remain stagnant. Jung wrote that people who refuse to confront their shadow will unconsciously force others to carry it. This is exactly what happens when you help these individuals. Their unprocessed emotions, anger, shame, jealousy, guilt spill over into your life. They will treat you as the cause of their misery when things don't change fast enough. They will accuse you of not helping enough, or helping incorrectly, or helping too late. In their mind, you become responsible for their outcomes because they cannot tolerate the discomfort of self-responsibility. When you step into their world, you enter a psychological battlefield where logic does not work, accountability does not exist, and emotional manipulation becomes the primary language. One of the most dangerous aspects of shadow-dominated people is that they demand emotional investment without offering anything in return. They expect you to rescue them from problems they created, and if you refuse, they paint you as heartless or selfish. This is the subtle power of the shadow. It bends reality. They truly believe the problem is external, not internal. They are convinced the world owes them something. Their suffering becomes their identity, and they cling to it like a shield. When someone's identity is built around being a victim, any attempt to help them threatens the foundation of who they think they are. They will reject responsibility because taking responsibility feels like losing their sense of self. They want sympathy, not transformation. They want comfort, not growth. They want attention, not healing. You cannot guide someone toward the light when they are attached to their darkness. Even when you give them advice, they will twist your words. If you encourage action, they say you don't understand them. If you set boundaries, they say you are abandoning them. If you tell the truth, they feel attacked. Every solution feels like criticism. Every suggestion feels like blame. Every boundary feels like betrayal. These reactions come from the shadow, which cannot tolerate being exposed. Jung explained that the shadow behaves like a frightened animal cornered in a dark room. It attacks reflexively, not understanding that the help being offered is meant to liberate it. Instead of gratitude, you receive resistance. Instead of openness, you encounter defensiveness. Instead of clarity, you face confusion and chaos. For shadow-dominated individuals, the cycle of suffering becomes a psychological addiction. They unconsciously recreate crisis after crisis because chaos is familiar. The unconscious mind prefers what is familiar over what is healthy. They reject peace because peace feels foreign. They reject stability because stability removes the drama that validates their internal narrative. When you help them, you become part of the drama. They will drain your time, your energy, your empathy, and your mental clarity. A single conversation with them can leave you exhausted because you are battling not just their words, but the unconscious forces driving them. Jung called this psychic contamination, the process where someone's unresolved inner conflicts spread into your psyche simply by being around them. Shadow-dominated people do not want solutions. They want witnesses to their suffering. They want someone to blame. They want someone to carry their emotional weight. But if you continue to help them, you eventually become the emotional dumping ground for their unconscious material. They will unload their shame onto you. They will project their failures onto you. They will make you responsible for the consequences of their own choices. This creates an unbalanced psychological bond where you are the caretaker and they are the perpetual victim. The more you try to save them, the more they resent you for it. They will accuse you of having control. They will accuse you of judging them. They will accuse you of thinking you are better than them. These accusations are not about you. They are about their shadow defending its survival. The shadow does not want to be healed. It wants to remain hidden, and your help threatens that secrecy. Many people get trapped in trying to help this group because they appear helpless and overwhelmed. But Jung warns that the appearance of helplessness is often a mask for deeper psychological resistance. These individuals are not lacking solutions, they are rejecting them. They are not lacking opportunities, they sabotage them. They are not lacking awareness, they avoid it. You can spend months or years pouring emotional energy into them and still see them make the same mistakes every time. They do not learn, they loop, they do not grow, they stagnate. They do not evolve, they regress. Jung believed that real transformation requires inner confrontation, and shadow-dominated people avoid that confrontation at all costs. This makes them psychologically dangerous not because they are evil, but because they are unconscious. The unconscious person harms others without intention. They drain without realizing it. They manipulate without planning. They project without awareness, and the person trying to help them becomes collateral damage. You cannot help someone who is committed to their own blindness. You cannot save someone who has not chosen to save themselves. You cannot carry someone who refuses to walk. Jung teaches that every individual must face their own shadow. No one else can do the work for them. When you interfere, you interrupt their process of individuation, the essential inner journey of becoming whole. Helping them becomes a violation of their psychological development and a threat to your own. Instead of growing stronger, they grow weaker and more dependent. Instead of expanding awareness, they deepen their denial. Instead of learning responsibility, they learn helplessness. Your help becomes enabling. Your compassion becomes a burden. Your presence becomes a safety net that allows them to avoid confronting their shadow. And the longer you participate, the more you sacrifice your own emotional well-being. To the shadow-dominated person, you will always be either the hero or the villain. If you help them, you are their hero until things go wrong. Then you become the villain. If something in their life falls apart, they will look at you as the reason. If they feel abandoned, it is your fault. If they fail, they blame you. Jung called this projection inflation, where a person's inner conflicts spill outward into the world. When you try to help, you get entangled in their projections. You begin to question yourself. You begin to carry their emotional weight. You begin to internalize their chaos. This is why helping them becomes psychologically dangerous. It alters your emotional balance, distorts your perception of responsibility, and drains your vitality. When you give them empathy, they consume it. When you give them time, they waste it. When you give them advice, they ignore it. When you give them boundaries, they fight it. Nothing you offer brings them closer to growth because they are not oriented toward growth. They are oriented toward emotional survival, and survival is driven by instinct, not consciousness. The truth is that many people do not want healing because healing requires self-awareness. It requires humility. It requires admitting their own mistakes. Shadow-dominated individuals are not ready for that. They want relief without responsibility. They want support without effort. They want the benefits of growth without the pain of growth. And because of this, helping them is like pouring water into a broken cup. No matter how much you give, it leaks. And the more you pour, the more exhausted you become. Jung said the task of the healer is not to force healing, but to awaken the individual's inner capacity to heal themselves. If they are not ready, your efforts work against both of you. The shadow must be confronted voluntarily. It cannot be confronted for them. Until they choose self-awareness, helping them only deepens their unconsciousness. They stay stuck, and you get stuck with them. The more you try to elevate them, the more they pull you down. You feel guilty for stepping back, but drained when you step in. This is the psychological trap of the shadow-dominated individual. Breaking free requires recognizing that not everyone wants to be saved. Some people want to stay exactly where they are because their identity depends on it. Your role is not to absorb their suffering, but to protect your own psychological integrity. Jung's depth psychology reveals that the most dangerous people to help are those who refuse to see themselves. They wear the pain of their past as armor. They cling to their wounds as proof of injustice. They use suffering as currency to buy attention, sympathy, and support. But healing does not happen in the absence of responsibility. No amount of external help can replace the inner work they are avoiding. The shadow remains in control until the individual consciously decides to confront it. Until that moment comes, any help they receive becomes fuel for their dysfunction. They become a black hole of emotional need, pulling in the energy of anyone who tries to assist them. And if you allow yourself to get pulled in, you lose your own clarity, stability, and sense of self. Jung warned that proximity to the unconscious can destabilize even the strongest individuals. Helping someone controlled by their shadow exposes you to psychological turbulence that is not your own. Their chaos becomes your chaos. Their confusion becomes your confusion. Their emotions become your burden. And because the shadow is unconscious, they will never acknowledge how much they drain you. Instead, they will demand more. This is why the first category of dangerous people you must not help is the shadow-dominated individual. They cannot be helped because they do not want change. They want relief, not responsibility. They want attention, not awareness. And until they choose to confront their own shadow, any attempt to rescue them leads both of you deeper into unconsciousness. Part 2. The Masked Manipulators, Persona-Driven Individuals. Masked manipulators are among the most psychologically deceptive and draining individuals because they operate through the persona, the socially constructed mask. Jung described as the edited version of the self presented to the world. While the persona is necessary for everyday functioning, problems arise when an individual becomes completely identified with it. Rather than using the persona as a bridge between the inner self and society, they use it as armor, camouflage, or a weapon. This creates a fundamental split between what they appear to be and who they actually are, making it extremely dangerous to offer help or support to them. When someone lives through their persona rather than their authentic self, all interactions become transactional. They position themselves to gain approval, sympathy, validation, or power, not genuine connection. Their entire personality becomes a carefully curated performance designed to elicit specific reactions from others. They appear gentle, humble, charming, grateful, or vulnerable when it benefits them, but these traits are instrumental rather than authentic. In Jungian terms, this is not an individual seeking integration, but one avoiding it. They hide behind the mask to escape confronting their own shadow, their unresolved complexes, and the deeper truth of who they are. Helping such a person puts you in direct conflict with their hidden agenda because what they present is never the full story. When you assist them, you are interacting with the mask, not the human being underneath it. This is why your support never seems to land properly. They may thank you, but the gratitude is shallow. They may promise to change, but the promise is performative. They may show vulnerability, but the vulnerability is staged. Because the persona is designed to manipulate perception, their behavior shifts depending on what will gain the most benefit in the moment. This instability makes it impossible to build a healthy reciprocal exchange, and any help you provide becomes fuel for their psychological disguise. Jung warned that a dominant persona traps the individual in a state of spiritual emptiness because the mask becomes more important than the truth. This creates a paradox where the manipulator is hollow inside but grandiose in appearance. They need constant emotional reinforcement to maintain the illusion of who they wish others to believe they are. They rely on external reactions, admiration, guilt, sympathy, fear to keep their persona alive. Your help becomes another brick in their mask, further enabling them to avoid the discomfort of self-awareness. Masked manipulators often present themselves as victims not because they genuinely suffer, but because victimhood is a powerful tool for control. People instinctively soften around vulnerability, and manipulators exploit this instinct. They may tell stories of hardship, betrayal, or injustice to gain your sympathy, but unlike truly wounded individuals seeking healing, they use their story as bait. The more you respond, the more they test the limits of how much you will tolerate. They observe your reactions, note what emotions sway you, and adapt their persona accordingly. This makes your help psychologically dangerous because it reinforces their belief that manipulation is effective. Instead of making them reflect inward, your assistance validates their strategy of using others to get what they want. They never learn to develop genuine responsibility because they are too busy perfecting the performance of helplessness or charm. Jung saw this as a failure in individuation, where the person refuses to integrate the inner world with the outer. Instead of facing their shadow, they project it. Instead of acknowledging their flaws, they disguise them. Instead of engaging with reality, they dramatize it. Their mask becomes a psychological parasite, feeding on external energy to survive. And the more you help, the more the parasite grows. Another deeply dangerous trait of persona-driven individuals is their mastery of subtle manipulation. They rarely resort to overt aggression. Instead, they use micro-behaviors: guilt-tripping, selective honesty, strategic silence, exaggerated praise, or emotional withdrawal. These techniques are effective because they create emotional confusion in the helper. You begin to question your judgment, wondering whether you misunderstood their intentions. This confusion is not accidental, it is engineered by the persona. Jung believed that manipulators project qualities they unconsciously reject within themselves. For example, someone who manipulates may accuse you of manipulation whenever you set boundaries. Someone who lies may accuse you of dishonesty. Someone who seeks control may label you as controlling. Because they cannot face their shadow, they push it onto others. When you try to help, you become the canvas for their projections. This is why helping them feels emotionally draining and psychologically destabilizing. No matter what you do, it is never enough, never correct, never appropriately delivered. Their persona needs you to remain off balance so they can maintain control. Masked manipulators often build relationships on unspoken obligations. They subtly create scenarios where you feel compelled to help them, whether through emotional reciprocity, moral duty, or perceived responsibility. They make you feel guilty when you step back, grateful when you comply, and uncertain when you question them. This psychological push and pull forms what Jung described as a psychic complex, a cluster of emotional energy that captures the individual and pulls others into its orbit. The manipulator's complex requires others to participate in their illusions, and anyone who becomes entangled experiences emotional fatigue, anxiety, and self-doubt. When you help them, you inadvertently enter the gravitational field of this complex. The mask may appear kind, humble, or loving, but underneath is a deep fear of exposure. They fear being seen for who they are, so they overcorrect with exaggerated performances of virtue. They fear losing control, so they charm or guilt others into compliance. They fear abandonment, so they create dependency. They fear insignificance, so they inflate their narrative. And because they act from fear rather than authenticity, any help you give them becomes distorted by their internal insecurities. You might try to offer constructive feedback, but they hear criticism. You might offer alternatives, but they hear rejection. You might suggest boundaries, but they interpret it as betrayal. Their persona cannot handle genuine emotional exchange because it is built on illusion, not honesty. Helping them means entering a relationship where truth is distorted, intentions are unclear, and emotions are manipulated. Jung believed that when the persona becomes inflated, the individual's inner world collapses. This collapse causes them to cling even harder to their mask, demanding more support from others. Helping them becomes a never-ending cycle. The more you give, the more they need. The more they need, the more they pressure you. The more they pressure you, the more you lose your emotional clarity. Masked manipulators are especially dangerous because they imitate sincerity. They study people understanding what expressions, tones, or narratives evoke compassion. Their empathy is not real but strategic. Their gratitude is temporary, fading when their needs are met. Their promises are conditional, dissolving when accountability appears. They prefer ambiguity because clarity reveals the truth. They prefer drama because drama keeps others emotionally invested. They prefer playing the victim because the victim holds emotional leverage. When you attempt to help, you are not addressing their real needs, you are feeding their emotional strategy. They rarely want solutions. They want participants in their psychological play. Your role becomes scripted without your consent. You become the rescuer, the advisor, the emotional cushion, the validator, or the scapegoat, depending on what role their persona requires. Jung explained that an overdeveloped persona always has a compensating shadow, meaning the more charming or innocent they appear, the darker the concealed traits usually are. This is why when the mask slips, even for a moment, you may see flashes of anger, coldness, envy, or entitlement. These moments reveal the unresolved inner conflicts beneath the surface. But instead of confronting these traits, masked manipulators cover them with another layer of persona. This refusal to integrate creates a split psyche that drains anyone who tries to help. True connection is impossible because the manipulator does not show their authentic self. True communication is impossible because they speak from costume, not truth. True healing is impossible because they never admit the need for genuine change. The more you help, the more deeply entangled you become in their illusions. Jung noted that the biggest danger in dealing with such individuals is losing your own sense of self. Their persona is so consuming, so emotionally seductive, that you begin serving their narrative instead of your own. You feel responsible for their feelings, obligated to ease their burdens, or guilty when asserting boundaries. Over time, your internal compass weakens because their psychological games create emotional fog. Masked manipulators also excel at creating emotional debts. They may offer small gestures of kindness that appear generous but are calculated to force your compliance later. They might offer praise to make you feel valued, only to withdraw it when you don't meet their expectations. This push and pull dynamic creates dependency, making it difficult for you to see where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. Helping them becomes a psychological trap because it shifts from voluntary support to coerced emotional labor. What makes these individuals especially dangerous is that they often appear more functional than shadow-dominated individuals. They can hold jobs, maintain friendships, and speak eloquently about their feelings. But this outward competence hides the deeper issue: they are disconnected from their true self. Their inner emptiness drives them to manipulate others for emotional sustenance. They cannot receive genuine help because genuine help requires vulnerability and honesty, two traits incompatible with an inflated persona. The moment you assist them, they reinterpret your intentions through the lens of their fears and desires, not reality. They may take advantage of your help, distort it, or weaponize it. They may portray you as controlling if you set limits, disloyal if you refuse to comply, or cruel if you withdraw. Jung observed that the persona is inherently fragile. When life challenges the manipulator, the mask cracks, revealing their deeper insecurities. But instead of using these moments for self-reflection, they double down on manipulation. They seek more sympathy, more validation, more emotional caretaking from others. And anyone who tries to help becomes entangled in a cycle of psychological dependence and emotional distortion. The greatest danger in helping persona-driven individuals is not the effort wasted, but the toll taken on your own psyche. They subtly reshape your emotional boundaries, distort your sense of responsibility, and invade your mental space with their constant need for validation. Your energy becomes fuel for their mask. Your empathy becomes a tool in their strategy. Your presence becomes an anchor for their illusions. And the more you give, the more invisible you become. Jung's teachings make one truth clear. When someone is trapped in their persona, they cannot grow, cannot receive genuine help, and cannot engage authentically with others. They are committed to the performance, not the transformation. Helping them only strengthens the mask they hide behind, deepening their disconnection from their true self and pulling you into their emotional theater. These individuals do not want healing. They want control. They do not want truth. They want validation. They do not want accountability. They want an audience. And in giving them help, you become part of the illusion rather than the catalyst for change. This is why Jungian psychology warns that persona-driven manipulators are among the most dangerous people you should never help. Not because they are malicious, but because they are unconscious. And the unconscious, when weaponized through the persona, becomes one of the most destructive psychological forces in human relationships. Part 3. The self-destructive individuals. Self-destructive individuals are among the most psychologically dangerous people to help because their inner world functions like a vortex. Anything that comes close gets pulled into their spiral of chaos. In Jungian psychology, this type of individual is dominated by unconscious complexes that have gained autonomous power. These complexes operate like subpersonalities inside the psyche, forcing repetitive patterns of self-sabotage despite conscious desires to improve. When someone is trapped in this loop, they sabotage themselves repeatedly, and anyone who tries to help becomes entangled in their pathology. Jung often described complexes as having a will of their own meaning. The person no longer acts from free will, but from psychological wounds that have taken control. Helping them means wrestling not with the individual, but with the unconscious forces governing their behavior, forces that do not respond to logic, kindness, or guidance. This makes the dynamic profoundly draining for the helper and futile for the one being helped. These individuals do not simply make mistakes, they recreate suffering. They do not simply face challenges, they manufacture disasters. They do not simply fall, they jump. Their life becomes a cycle of choosing the wrong people, the wrong habits, the wrong opportunities, the wrong reactions, because their unconscious conditioning seeks pain, familiarity, and repetition. Jung believed that the psyche repeats what it cannot process. For self-destructive individuals, unprocessed trauma becomes a magnet for experiences that mirror the original wound. If they grew up with instability, they seek instability. If they were neglected, they gravitate toward people who neglect them. If they were betrayed, they trust betrayers. They are addicted to what hurts them because pain feels like home. This is why helping them is not just ineffective, it is psychologically dangerous. Your attempts to lift them up collide with their unconscious drive to fall. They will sabotage their progress the moment things start to improve, not because they consciously want failure, but because success feels unfamiliar. The unconscious prefers repetition, not transformation. When you offer support, they accept it momentarily, but soon afterward their complex reactivates and pulls them back to old behaviors. This gives you the illusion that they want change, when in reality they are loyal to their self-destruction. Jung said neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Self-destructive individuals avoid confronting their underlying wounds, so their life becomes a series of crises that distract them from deeper pain. Helping them shields them from the consequences that might force introspection. You become the buffer between them and their necessary suffering, preventing them from hitting the psychological bottom that could initiate real transformation. You think you're helping, but you're actually delaying their awakening. This dynamic creates a dangerous loop where your empathy fuels their pathology. Every time you save them, they avoid confronting the truth. Every time you support them, they avoid accountability. Every time you comfort them, they avoid change. You become their emotional crutch, their psychological cushion, their personal safety net. And once they realize you're willing to catch them, they stop trying to stand at all. Their identity becomes tied to being rescued. Jung viewed this as the archetype of the victim, a powerful unconscious pattern that traps the individual in learned helplessness. A person who identifies as a victim is not seeking empowerment. They are seeking validation for their suffering. Helping them becomes a trap because they interpret it as confirmation that they are incapable. They don't want to grow. They want someone else to carry the weight of their life. Self-destructive individuals are dangerous precisely because they are inconsistent. One moment they seem motivated, inspired, ready for change. The next moment they collapse into despair, self-pity, or reckless behavior. Their emotional volatility destabilizes anyone who tries to assist them. You might spend hours encouraging them, helping them plan, guiding them toward healthier choices, only to watch them undo everything overnight. They will abandon opportunities the moment they arise. They will reject support when it could actually help them. They will return to toxic relationships or habits even after escaping them. This unpredictability drains your emotional and mental resources. You begin to question your impact, your judgment, your boundaries. The more you give, the more they waste. The more you invest, the more they abandon. Jung said that when a person is possessed by a complex, their behavior becomes erratic because the complex hijacks their decision-making. Trying to help someone in that state is like trying to hold someone upright during an earthquake. They cannot stabilize until the internal shaking stops. They cannot accept help until the complex loses power. And you cannot weaken their complex for them. Only they can face it. Another dangerous aspect of self-destructive individuals is their unconscious need to bring others into their emotional chaos. They cannot tolerate seeing someone stable, calm, or grounded because it triggers their sense of inadequacy. Jung observed that people who avoid their own darkness become hypersensitive to the light in others. Your stability threatens them, so they destabilize you. Your clarity exposes their confusion, so they create drama. Your boundaries expose their lack of discipline, so they test your limits. These individuals may unconsciously sabotage your peace through emotional dumping, crisis creation, or pulling you into their catastrophes. They will call you in the middle of the night with problems they created. They will expect you to drop everything to fix their emergencies. They will draw you into conflicts, arguments, or drama cycles that drain your energy. If you refuse to participate, they interpret it as abandonment or betrayal. They weaponize guilt to keep you involved. If you withdraw, they escalate. If you step back, they fall apart intentionally to pull you back in. Jung described this as the pull of the unconscious, a gravitational force where unresolved psychological material demands attention. Their unconscious pulls on your consciousness until you become entangled. Helping them invites this pull into your life. You become part of their chaos. Because the unconscious seeks expansion, it spreads. Their emotional instability becomes yours. Their anxiety infects your mind. Their self-hatred echoes inside you. Their fear shifts into your nervous system. This is why staying in close proximity to self-destructive individuals fractures your psychological balance. You begin to think about their problems constantly. You begin to anticipate their crises. You begin to carry their emotional weight. Your life becomes oriented around their dysfunction, and the more you help, the more trapped you become. The danger intensifies when the self-destructive person relies on you for emotional survival. They may become dependent, clinging to you as their source of strength, clarity, and stability. But dependency is not connection, it is psychological possession. They absorb your energy because they cannot generate their own. They rely on your optimism because they lack internal hope. They lean on your discipline because they lack structure. But no amount of your emotional strength can compensate for their unconscious wounds. You cannot become the ego they refuse to develop. You cannot be the stability they refuse to cultivate. You cannot be the consciousness they avoid building. Jung believed that every individual must integrate their own psyche. No one can do it for them. When you try to help someone who refuses to do inner work, you violate this principle and enter a psychologically fatal arrangement. You give your energy, and they consume it. The most dangerous pattern appears when you start believing you can fix them. This belief is seductive because their progress often appears briefly after your intervention. They may show gratitude, determination, or clarity for a moment, making you believe your presence is transformative. But this is not transformation, it is emotional dependency disguised as progress. Their improvement is situational, not structural. It comes from your energy, not their own. When you step away, their collapse reveals the truth. Jung referred to this phenomenon as borrowed ego strength. The self-destructive person temporarily borrows the helper's psychological resources, creating the illusion of improvement. But because they have not developed these resources internally, the change cannot last. This repetition trains you to become addicted to rescuing them. You help, they improve briefly, you feel validated, then they fall again and you feel responsible. This cycle is not healing, it is enmeshment. Your self-worth becomes tied to their survival. Your emotional state becomes tied to their stability. Your time becomes tied to their crises, and their crises never end. Self-destructive individuals often have deeply wounded inner children. Jung believed that childhood trauma creates split-off parts of the psyche that remain frozen in time. These parts act out in adulthood, seeking the attention, care, or validation they never received. When you help them, you awaken these wounded parts. They attach to you, seeing you as the parental figure they always longed for. But they do not understand boundaries, reciprocity, or emotional responsibility because the inner child operates from primal need, not adult awareness. They demand constant reassurance. They expect unconditional availability. They react emotionally to trivial issues. They explode when they feel misunderstood. They collapse when they face discomfort. This makes helping them a parental role, not a relationship. And once you become the parent, you cannot become anything else. They will not respect your boundaries because children do not understand boundaries. They will not handle your emotional needs because children cannot care for adults. They will not support your growth because children see adults as resources. You become emotionally starved because all energy flows toward them. This dynamic destroys your balance, health, and psychological integrity. Self-destructive individuals may also exhibit what Jung called negative inflation, a state where a person feels uniquely doomed or uniquely incapable. This is as ego-driven as positive inflation, but expressed through despair instead of arrogance. They insist their suffering is special, their wounds are exceptional, their destiny is cursed. This mindset makes them resistant to solutions. They reject advice because they believe no one understands their pain. They reject help because they believe their problems are impossible. They reject responsibility because they believe the world is against them. Their worldview is rigid, irrational, and steeped in unconscious fear. You cannot help someone whose identity is built on hopelessness. Every suggestion feels invalidating. Every boundary feels like abandonment. Every attempt to empower them feels threatening to their victim identity. Jung warned that the victim archetype can become tyrannical. When someone becomes attached to their suffering, they weaponize it. They guilt-trip you for not helping enough. They accuse you of being heartless. They emotionally punish you for having boundaries. They create a moral obligation for you to fix their life. Helping them becomes a prison where you are responsible for their happiness, and they take no responsibility for anything. This is why self-destructive individuals often ruin the lives of those who try to save them. They do not improve. They intensify. They do not grow. They regress. They do not take ownership. They expect rescue. And the more you rescue, the more dependent they become. The true danger comes when you start adapting your life around their instability. You cancel plans to handle their crises. You sacrifice sleep, energy, and peace to stabilize them. You absorb their emotional meltdowns. You suppress your needs to avoid triggering them. Your life becomes a reaction to their chaos. Jung wrote that the unconscious seeks to make others unconscious. When you help a self-destructive person, their unconscious pulls you into their darkness until you lose perspective. You start to accept dysfunction as normal. You start to ignore your boundaries. You start to tolerate behavior that would once be unacceptable. You shrink so they can feel bigger. You dim so they can feel brighter. You drown slowly in their emotional ocean. Helping them becomes a form of self-destruction. Jung believed that true change requires confrontation with the shadow and integration of the unconscious. Self-destructive individuals avoid this confrontation with every fiber of their being. They will not heal until their desire for change outweighs their fear of pain. No amount of external support can replace internal willingness. They must face their wounds, their patterns, and their responsibility. If they refuse, helping them is not compassion, it is complicity in their self-destruction and yours. Self-destructive people are dangerous not because they intend harm, but because they are ruled by forces they refuse to acknowledge. They are at war with themselves, and anyone who gets close becomes part of the battlefield. Their unconscious does not want healing, it wants repetition. Helping them becomes a sacrifice of your stability, your emotional health, and your psychological clarity. They are drowning and pulling you down not because they hate you, but because drowning people cling to anything. But if you allow them to wrap around you, you will sink with them. This is the danger Jung warned about. Never fight someone's unconscious. With your consciousness, you will lose. Part 4. The psychic contaminators. Psychic contaminators are the most dangerous people to help because their very presence disrupts the structure of your psyche. These individuals operate like emotional toxins, leaking negativity, resentment, envy, and psychological tension into the environment around them. Jung understood this phenomenon well. He called it psychic infection, a process in which the unconscious of one person spills into another's, penetrating emotional boundaries and destabilizing inner equilibrium. Helping these people does not simply drain your energy, it alters your emotional chemistry. Their psychological darkness does not stay contained within their minds, it spreads. And because they are unconscious of their effects, the contamination is not intentional but instinctive. This makes them even more dangerous because unconscious behavior is the most contagious form of human influence. Jung believed that emotions are not just internal experiences, they are energetic forces capable of transferring between people. Psychic contaminators carry unresolved hatred, bitterness, inferiority, shame, or fear, and they cannot hold these emotions inside without leaking them outward. Their psyche is overloaded, and the overflow spills onto anyone who gets close. When you help them, you expose yourself to this overflow. You are not simply dealing with a person, you are dealing with a storm of unprocessed emotions, complexes, and projections. Their unconscious seeks a host, and the helper becomes the perfect container. They deposit their heaviness into you while taking your lightness for themselves. This dynamic is not immediately obvious, because psychic contamination is subtle at first. You may not realize it is happening until you feel physically drained, emotionally agitated, or mentally foggy after interacting with them. You may find yourself thinking thoughts that are not yours, feeling emotions that do not belong to you, or engaging in behaviors that contradict your usual character. This is not imagination, it is psychological absorption. Their inner chaos infiltrates your inner world. Psychic contaminators thrive in environments where emotional boundaries are weak. They seek out empathetic, sensitive, intuitive people who absorb emotional cues easily. Jung said that those who feel deeply are most vulnerable to the unconscious of others, and this vulnerability becomes the entry point for contamination. The more open-hearted you are, the easier it is for their unresolved emotions to enter your psychic space. Helping them becomes a form of self-betrayal because you sacrifice your inner stability to soothe their inner turmoil. But their turmoil is endless, and your stability is finite. This asymmetry ensures that the helper drains faster than the contaminated person heals. These individuals often carry what Jung called the destroyer archetype, a psychic pattern that unconsciously seeks to break down, weaken, or invade the structures around them. They are not destroyers because they are evil. They are destroyers because their inner world is collapsing, and collapsing structures pull everything nearby down with them. Their energy is heavy, dense, and congested. It suffocates. Helping them feels like entering a room with no oxygen. Your clarity dims the moment their presence fills the space. Even if they say nothing, their energy speaks. Their silence is loaded with tension. Their expressions are laced with contempt. Their posture radiates defeat. Everything about them communicates an unconscious message. Carry this for me. Jung believed that unconsciously wounded people broadcast their pain energetically. Psychic contaminators operate like emotional transmitters. They do not speak their pain directly. They project it. They plant seeds of doubt, fear, or unease in your psyche simply by being near you. You might feel suddenly anxious without a reason. You might feel irritable when the situation does not call for it. You might feel self-critical or insecure despite having been confident moments earlier. These shifts are signs that you have absorbed their emotional frequency. Helping them means exposing yourself repeatedly to this emotional distortion, and over time the distortion becomes habitual. One of the most subtle and dangerous behaviors of psychic contaminators is their ability to provoke emotional reactions in others without expressing anything clearly. They create psychological tension through implication rather than action. Their facial expressions carry judgment even when they remain silent. Their presence suggests disapproval, disappointment, or hostility. They rarely articulate their feelings directly, because articulation requires introspection, and introspection is something they avoid. Instead, they weaponize their emotional state by making everyone around them feel what they refuse to process themselves. This is projection in its purest form, forcing the environment to carry the unbearable contents of their unconscious. Jung observed that individuals who refuse to confront their shadow force their shadow onto others. Psychic contaminators are experts at this. They make you feel guilty for their failures. They make you feel responsible for their sadness. They make you feel obligated to fix their life. They make you feel afraid of upsetting them. They train the people around them to anticipate their emotional reactions and adjust accordingly. This creates an atmosphere of emotional tension where everyone walks on psychological eggshells. Helping them means entering this atmosphere, voluntarily breathing in the density of their negativity and becoming part of the emotional ecosystem they create. These individuals may appear calm on the surface, but beneath that calm is a psychological swamp filled with resentment, jealousy, self-loathing, and cynicism. Their silence is not peace, it is pressure. Their quietness is not gentleness, it is emotional paralysis. Their calm demeanor is a mask for an inner world that is rotting. When you try to help them, the mask cracks, and what emerges is not gratitude, but toxicity. They may respond to your support with passive aggression, dismissiveness, fatalism, or criticism. Helping them threatens their psychological equilibrium because your presence highlights their internal decay. They resent you not because you harmed them, but because your stability exposes their instability. Jung wrote that whatever is unconscious will be experienced as fate. Psychic contaminators believe their misery is imposed by the world, not created by their psyche. They externalize blame and internalize nothing. This worldview makes them psychologically contagious because they spread the belief that life is hostile, people are untrustworthy, hope is pointless, and dreams are delusions. If you help them long enough, you begin to adopt their worldview. You see life through their eyes. You speak their fears. You internalize their hopelessness. Their psychic infection rewrites your internal narrative. Psychic contamination is particularly dangerous in close relationships. If you live with or care for someone who carries this energy, the contamination becomes chronic. You begin to anticipate their emotional climate before entering a room. You tense up without knowing why. You adapt your behavior to avoid triggering their negativity. You unconsciously shrink your personality to avoid conflict. Over time, you lose your authenticity. Jung called this loss of soul a state in which a person becomes disconnected from their true self due to prolonged exposure to destructive psychic influences. Helping a psychic contaminator accelerates this loss because the helper becomes psychologically subordinate to the emotional needs of the contaminated individual. What makes psychic contaminators distinct from self-destructive individuals is that they actively transmit their inner negativity to others rather than simply collapsing within themselves. They are carriers. They do not want support. They want space to offload their emotional poison. They do not want advice. They want witnesses to their misery. They do not want healing. They want emotional dumping. And because they feel powerless internally, they seek power externally by influencing the emotional states of others. Helping them becomes psychologically dangerous because it places you in the direct path of their need to discharge emotional toxins. Jung emphasized that emotional contagion is not mystical, it is psychological. Humans are profoundly empathetic creatures. Our nervous systems mirror the emotional states of those around us. When you sit with someone angry, your pulse quickens. When you sit with someone depressed, your energy drops. When you sit with someone anxious, your body activates stress responses. Psychic contaminators rely on this mechanism unconsciously. They regulate their emotions by dysregulating yours. They feel lighter as you feel heavier. They feel calmer as you feel agitated. They feel stable as you feel destabilized. This emotional transfer is the mechanism through which psychic contamination operates. These individuals often express their negativity in ways that force others to carry emotional labor. They sigh heavily, slam objects, make sarcastic comments, or stare with disapproval. These small actions create emotional tremors that ripple outward. You feel compelled to soothe them, fix the situation, or adjust your behavior. Helping them intensifies this dynamic because it communicates to their unconscious that emotional dumping is effective. They learn that negativity yields attention, validation, and care. This reinforces their use of emotional contagion as a coping mechanism. Jung warned that individuals carrying unintegrated shadow energy often influence others more strongly than those who are psychologically healthy. This is because unconscious emotions have a raw primal power that conscious emotions do not. Psychic contaminators radiate the raw energy of their wounds. They do not filter their emotions, they expel them. Helping them requires entering the blast zone of their unconscious energy, and no one leaves that zone unchanged. Another dangerous aspect of psychic contaminators is their tendency to create emotional triangles. They pit people against each other intentionally or unintentionally by spreading their negativity across multiple relationships. They may speak badly about others, sow seeds of doubt, or encourage conflict. They thrive on emotional chaos because chaos distracts them from their internal suffering. Helping them pulls you into this triangle, forcing you to mediate, defend, or comfort them. This dynamic warps your relationships and creates fractures in your social environment. Jung observed that psychic toxicity often hides behind the facade of fragility. Many psychic contaminators appear delicate, wounded, or overwhelmed. They attract helpers who mistake fragility for innocence. But fragility can be as destructive as aggression when it drains the emotional resources of others. A fragile person who refuses to take responsibility becomes a psychological weight that crushes those who try to carry them. Helping them deepens this fragility because you reinforce their belief that others must compensate for their emotional shortcomings. What makes psychic contaminators especially dangerous is their resistance to positivity. If you try to offer hope, they shut it down. If you give encouragement, they counter it with pessimism. If you express optimism, they correct you with despair. They attack positive energy because it threatens their emotional narrative. Their psyche is structured around negativity, and any attempt to disrupt this structure triggers defensiveness. Helping them requires absorbing their negativity while watching your positivity decay. Over time, your internal light dims because their shadow overwhelms your psyche. Jung believed that every individual has an emotional ecosystem. Psychic contaminators destroy the ecosystems of those around them. They turn environments, hostile conversations, draining interactions heavy. They create atmospheres where creativity dies, inspiration fades, and motivation dissolves. Helping them places you inside this ecosystem until your own emotional vitality deteriorates. Their presence makes you tired. Their voice makes you tense. Their stories make you numb. Their energy makes you slow. Helping them means inhaling their emotional smog. This smog clogs your mind, weighs down your soul, and poisons your spirit. Ultimately, psychic contaminators are dangerous because they do not recognize their impact. They genuinely believe they are expressing normal emotions, not transmitting psychic toxins. They believe others are overly sensitive, not that they are emotionally radioactive. They believe their negativity is justified, not that it is destructive. They believe they are victims of life, not carriers of psychological infection. Helping them, therefore, is not compassion, it is exposure. Exposure to emotional toxins, psychological contagion, distorted worldviews, and energetic depletion. Jung taught that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Psychic contaminators refuse to face their darkness. Helping them forces you to carry it, and their darkness grows the more you absorb it. Carl Jung taught that not everyone wants to be healed. Some people only want witnesses to their suffering. If this video opened your eyes, remember this: protecting your energy is not selfish, it is survival. When you stop helping the wrong people, you create room for genuine connection, real growth, and your own individuation. Until you claim your boundaries, your shadow will choose for you. Stay conscious, stay aware, and keep walking your path.